The silence of a house that has forgotten you exist is a very specific kind of cold. It is not the sudden chill of an open window in winter, but rather the slow, heavy dampness that settles into your bones over a lifetime of being overlooked. For as long as my memory stretches, I was the ghost inhabiting the background of my own family's grand theater production. My birthdays were not celebrated with bright balloons or eager gatherings. They were casual afterthoughts, marked by a hasty text message sent late in the evening or a cheap grocery store card left on the kitchen counter. I watched from the shadows as my parents poured every ounce of their affection, their attention, and their financial resources into my older brother, Julian. Julian was the golden child, a boy whose mediocre achievements were treated like historic triumphs and whose constant failures were instantly wiped clean by my parents' desperate interventions. When Julian wanted to play travel hockey, my parents worked extra shifts and sacrificed their weekends to drive him across state lines, cheering until their voices were hoarse. When I made the varsity debate team and begged them to attend the state finals, my father didn't even look up from his newspaper, murmuring that the traffic downtown was simply too difficult to handle. I grew up wearing faded hand-me-downs and studying by the dim light of a desk lamp I found in a neighbor's trash, learning early that my needs were an inconvenience to the household. When Julian turned 16, a glossy, brand-new truck was parked in the driveway, with a massive red bow taped to the hood, funded entirely by my parents' retirement savings. When I turned 18, I received a pack of printer paper and a lecture about how expensive the electricity bill had become since I started staying up late to study for advanced placement exams. I didn't complain, and I never threw tantrums, because I genuinely believed that if I was good enough, quiet enough, and successful enough, they would eventually notice me. I worked 2 jobs while maintaining a perfect grade point average in college, surviving on instant noodles and pure, stubborn determination while Julian floated through life on a cloud of unearned luxury. Julian dropped out of 3 different universities, opened 2 failed boutique businesses that went bankrupt within months, and accumulated thousands of dollars in high-interest credit card debt. Every single time Julian crashed into a wall of his own making, my parents would instantly rush to his side, weeping with sympathy and emptying their pockets to cushion his fall. They bought him a luxury apartment, paid his monthly insurance premiums, and defended his absolute lack of responsibility by claiming he was a sensitive, creative soul who just needed time to find his true path. Meanwhile, I was living in a cramped, drafty studio apartment near the industrial rail yards, calculating my grocery budget down to the exact penny just to ensure my tuition checks wouldn't bounce. The illusion of my family dynamic didn't shatter with a massive, explosive argument. It dissolved on a rainy Tuesday morning inside a quiet downtown bank branch. I had encountered a severe emergency when the ancient radiator in my studio apartment burst, destroying my textbooks, my computer, and requiring an immediate $2,000 deposit for a new lease. For the first time in my independent life, I felt a wave of panic, knowing that my current checking account was entirely empty after paying my final semester fees. Then, a sudden memory brought a rush of intense relief to my chest, the joint childhood savings account that my maternal grandmother had established for me when I was a toddler. Over 20 years, my grandmother had quietly deposited birthday checks, holiday gifts, and small portions of her inheritance into that account, strictly designated for my future. I walked into the warmth of the bank, the scent of wet umbrellas and polished brass filling the air as I waited in line, my heart beating with a quiet sense of security. I slid my identification across the marble desk to the teller, a kind older woman with silver hair who offered a polite, professional smile as she pulled up the account routing codes. "I need to make a withdrawal of $2,000 from my savings account, please," I said, my voice steady as I watched her fingers move across the keyboard. The smile on the teller's face slowly froze, her eyes scanning the monitor before a look of deep, professional discomfort washed over her features. She looked up at me, her brow furrowing as she leaned forward, lowering her voice so that the customers at the adjacent desks couldn't overhear. "I am so sorry, dear, but there seems to be a mistake," the teller whispered, turning the monitor slightly toward me. "The current balance of this account is exactly $12.43. A wave of pure, Icy numbness instantly washed over my body, the sounds of the bustling bank suddenly fading into a distant, muffled echo. "That's impossible," I stammered, my fingers tightly gripping the edge of the desk as I stared at the flashing digital numbers on the screen. "My grandmother put over $15,000 in that trust." The teller sighed softly, her eyes filled with a deep, genuine pity as she began to scroll through the historical transaction ledgers stretching back over the last 3 years. "The account was structured as a joint asset with your primary guardians when you were a child, and it appears a series of massive electronic transfers were executed over the last 36 months," she explained. She printed out the heavy paper trail, sliding the crisp sheets across the desk into my trembling hands, the ink still warm against my frozen skin. As my eyes raced down the long columns of numbers, the freezing realization settled deep into my chest, hollowing out the final remnants of my innocence. My parents did not just ignore my existence, they had quietly, systematically drained my childhood savings account to the absolute bone behind my back. The paper trail was undeniable, showing huge automated transfers matching the exact dates of Julian's second boutique business collapse and his luxury apartment deposits. They had used my dead grandmother's love and my private financial future as a secret, bottomless vault to buy temporary peace for their golden child. I stood up from the desk, folding the heavy paper trail into my coat pocket, walking out into the pouring rain without saying another single word to the teller. As the freezing water soaked through my cheap jacket, the desperate desire for their love died a sudden, quiet death inside my heart, replaced by an unbreakable, mechanical resolve. I didn't drive to their house to scream, and I didn't send a flurry of hysterical text messages demanding an explanation for their theft. Instead, I sat in my ruined apartment for 3 hours, systematically tallying every single penny my parents legally and financially owed me over the course of my life. I compiled the documented cosign agreements I had signed for their utility emergencies, the private loans I had given my mother for her medical copays, and the stolen trust fund with accrued interest. I realized that my silence had been their greatest weapon, a shield that allowed them to treat my life like a disposable resource for Julian's comfort. The next day, I quietly packed my remaining clothes into cardboard boxes, broke the lease on my ruined studio, and accepted a high-paying corporate finance offer in a city 500 miles away. I changed my phone number, locked down my social media profiles, and vanished into the gray expanse of a new metropolis, completely cutting the digital threads that tied me to their world. For 2 years, I lived in absolute, beautiful radio silence, pouring my energy into my corporate career and building a life of pure financial stability and independence. I bought a sun-filled apartment with large glass windows, filled my savings accounts with my own hard-earned money, and learned the deep luxury of a peaceful, quiet evening. I never checked on them, and I never asked our mutual relatives about their lives, treating my past as a closed book that had been stored away in a dark attic. The strategy of my pro-revenge wasn't born out of a desire for a dramatic, cinematic confrontation. It was a cold, mathematical deployment of pure accountability. On the second anniversary of my relocation, I pulled the thick financial ledger from my desk, verified the legal interest rates, and drafted an official, professional invoice. The total amount demanded, including the drained trust fund, the unpaid personal loans, and the administrative interest, came to exactly $14,800. I attached the full, certified paper trail from the bank, secured an official notary seal, and sent the document by a certified legal mail directly to my parents' suburban home. I knew with absolute certainty that the arrival of that document would shatter the fragile peace of their household, but I had no idea how perfect my timing actually was. The certified envelope arrived at their doorstep on a Friday afternoon, the exact day that Julian's reckless lifestyle had finally caught up with him in a court of law. Julian had been arrested for writing bad commercial checks and destroying corporate property during a failed logistics venture, and his bail was set at precisely $14,000. My parents were sitting in their living room in a state of absolute, breathless panic, frantically calling banks and relatives to secure the cash needed to save their golden child from a prison cell. When the mail carrier rang the doorbell, my mother rushed to the door, mistakenly believing that a predatory personal loan they had applied for had finally been approved. Instead, she opened the heavy envelope and found my cold, professional invoice demanding the immediate return of the funds they had stolen from me 2 years prior. The family meltdown that followed was a magnificent domino effect of pure, unadulterated chaos, and my silent phone suddenly lit up with emergency alerts from my digital legal proxy. Because I had blocked their personal numbers, my father was forced to use a neighbor's landline, his voice exploding through the speaker the moment I calmly answered the call. "Rachel, how dare you do this to us?" My father screamed, his voice shaking with a mixture of burning rage and absolute financial desperation. "Your brother is facing jail time, and you send a legal demand for money? Are you completely heartless? We are your parents, we raised you, and you are trying to destroy this family over ancient history and a savings account." I held the phone away from my ear, looking out at the beautiful city skyline from my quiet apartment, my heart rate entirely steady as he carried on. "You didn't raise me, Dad," I replied, my voice smooth, chillingly calm, and entirely devoid of the emotional pain that used to consume me. "You tolerated my presence while using my name as a financial shield. The $14,000 you need to save Julian from his own criminal choices is currently sitting in the ledger of what you stole from my dead grandmother's trust." My mother snatched the phone from his hands, her voice instantly shifting into a weaponized, weeping affection that made my skin crawl with disgust. "Rachel, honey, please listen to me," she sobbed, using the sweet, maternal tone that she usually reserved exclusively for Julian's crises. "We always loved you. We were just trying to keep the family afloat. We didn't mean to hurt you. We were going to pay that money back to you the moment Julian's business became successful. I swear on my life we were. Please, drop this legal demand and loan us the $14,000 just to get your brother out of jail, and we will become a real family again, I promise." The contrast between her sudden, fake affection and the burning panic over the money was so stark that a soft, cynical laugh escaped my lips. "The answer is no, Mother," I said softly, letting the word hang in the space between us like a heavy iron gate locking them out forever. "You have exactly 30 days to clear that invoice. If the funds are not deposited into my corporate account by the deadline, my attorney will file a formal civil fraud complaint with the state prosecutor's office. You can choose to pay the debt you owe me, or you can watch the state audit your bank accounts while Julian sits in a county cell reflecting on his life choices." The phone line went dead as she let out a horrified, breathless shriek, realizing that the quiet, compliant daughter they had spent a lifetime ignoring had completely vanished. Over the next 3 weeks, the toxic dynamic of my family completely collapsed under the weight of true, unyielding accountability for the first time in their lives. They tried to mobilize our extended relatives, sending flying lines of cousins and aunts to bomb my professional email with messages claiming that I was destroying my parents' health over money. I didn't engage in the drama, and I didn't write long paragraphs defending my choices. I simply replied with a digital copy of the bank transfer showing my parents draining my trust fund. The moment the extended family saw the undeniable paper trail of theft, the chorus of criticism died a sudden, embarrassed death, leaving my parents completely isolated in their ruin. To save Julian from prison, my father was forced to take out a high-interest secondary mortgage on their suburban home, stripping away the final bit of equity they possessed. They paid the $14,000 to the court, but the legal bills and the predatory interest rates broke their financial backbone entirely, forcing them into a life of genuine hardship. When the 30-day deadline arrived, a wire transfer for $14,800 dropped into my corporate account, completely settling the ledger of their exploitation. I didn't use the money to buy luxury items or celebrate my victory. I quietly deposited it into a private scholarship trust for young students who had been abandoned by their own blood. 2 months later, my father sent one final text message through my legal intermediary's office, his words stripped of all anger, leaving only a hollow, exhausted bitterness. "You won, Rachel," the message read. "Julian is on probation, our house is buried in debt, and your mother, and I have to work retail jobs in our 60s just to afford our food. I hope you're happy with what your revenge did to this family. I sat in my beautiful, sun-filled living room, the quiet peace of my apartment wrapped around me like an unbreakable shield as I read his final words. I didn't feel a rush of malicious joy, and I didn't feel a single ounce of regret because I knew that reality hadn't been caused by my revenge. The destruction of their household was simply the natural, inevitable consequence of their own choices, a harvest of the bitter seeds they had planted over decades of cruelty. They had spent a lifetime sacrificing the innocent child to feed the insatiable greed of the golden child, and they were finally being forced to live in the desert they had created. I closed the laptop, walked out onto my balcony, and watched the city lights flicker to life under the darkening evening sky, feeling completely, beautifully liberated. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are the child who has been forgotten, ignored, or used as a silent safety net by the people who were supposed to love you, I want you to hear me clearly. Your value is not defined by their inability to see you, and your future is not a sacrifice that you owe to people who only notice your presence when their pockets are empty. Strength does not mean enduring emotional exploitation in the name of a toxic family loyalty that only flows in one direction. True power is born the exact moment you stop begging for their approval, step away from their chaos, and begin to place your own self-worth first. My financial victory was a beautiful achievement, a complete restoration of the resources that had been stolen from my dead grandmother's legacy. But the true victory, the one that allowed me to sleep deeply every single night, was the absolute freedom of knowing that I no longer needed their validation to exist. Home is not a geographic location printed on an ID card, and home is certainly not a place where your blood is drained to fund someone else's laziness. Home is where your boundaries are treated as sacred, where your hard work is honored, and above all else, home is where you are respected.